And welcome to all of our listeners and viewers. The United Nations is warning millions of Pakistanis are at risk of deadly waterborne diseases more than 2 weeks since Pakistan's worst ever flooding began. The World Health Organization says around 6 million people, over half of them children, face the threat of cholera and dysentery, as well as typhoid and hepatitis. Thomas Battardi of Doctors Without Borders said in addition to destroying crops and homes, the floodwaters could bring further devastation with the spread of disease.
People are swimming in floodwater, water that's picked up all the dirt and germs that were in the ground and in places where sanitation standards were lacking. People are bathing in contaminated water. Obviously, that carries a health risk for the people.
The flooding has killed over 1,600 people and displaced 20 million, nearly 12% of Pakistan's population. Flood victims continue to hold protests against the lack of aid. On Monday, hundreds of people blocked a main road in Sindh province with stones and debris.
There seems to be no government here since the floods. We lost our children, our livestock. We could hardly save ourselves. Though we have come here, we're getting nothing. Where is the government? What do we do? Where do we go? We have to tell the government, and it's the responsibility of the government to do whatever is possible.
Al Jazeera reports overwhelmed medical workers were forced to turn away patients at a main hospital in Peshawar in order to prioritize care for sick children. Despite the devastation, international donors have provided little help. Just 20% of a UN appeal for $460 million has been met. In a visit to Pakistan, UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon described the massive floods as the worst natural disaster he's ever witnessed and urged greater international aid.
I will never forget the destruction and sufferings I have witnessed today. In the past, I have visited scenes of many natural resource and natural disasters around the world, but nothing like this. The scale of this disaster is so large, so many people in so many places, in so much need. Nearly 1 out of 10 Pakistanis has been directly or indirectly affected, possibly 20 million people. 1/5 of the country is ravaged by floods.
That was UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon pleading for international aid. We're joined right now by the UN's top humanitarian official, Under-Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs and Emergency Relief Coordinator, John Holmes. He accompanied Ban in Pakistan this past weekend. We're also joined on the line from Pakistan by Mosharraf Zaidi, a Pakistani analyst based in Islamabad. He writes regular columns for The News of Pakistan and Al-Shuruq of Egypt, which can be found at his website, mosharrafzaidi.com. John Holmes, let's begin with you. What did you see in Pakistan and what needs to be done?
Obviously, the most striking thing when we were there was the sheer extent of the flooding, stretching from south to north for more than 1,500 miles and affecting, as you said, 20 million people. It's not that this is a more dramatic disaster than, say, the Haiti earthquake, and certainly, unfortunately, the death toll is much less. But the extent of it, the magnitude of it, the number of people affected are in many ways unprecedented. That's what we're trying to face. That's why it will be some time, I'm afraid, before all the people in need are reached either by the government or by UN agencies or NGOs or the Red Cross, Red Crescent trying to help. What we're trying to do is make sure that the international community gives us the resources we need. Actually, things are improving. The latest figures this morning suggest that if you count the contributions and pledges, we've got about half of what we asked for last week. We asked for 460 million. We're about at 220 million, counting the contributions and pledges, and that's not a bad figure for this stage of an appeal. And, of course, other aid is flooding in from different countries bilaterally as well. But it's going to take a long time because the sheer magnitude of the disaster is such that the numbers are overwhelming everybody.
And John Holmes, what is the issue now in Pakistan? The UN is warning against the spread of waterborne diseases. Can you talk about that?
Well, obviously, very large numbers of people have been displaced. They're living in the open. They need food, they need water, clean water, they need shelter, and, of course, they need medical supplies. And our biggest fear, as you suggest, is waterborne diseases, acute watery diarrhea, diarrhea of different kinds, malaria, because, of course, mosquitoes are spreading in these kind of stagnant water conditions, skin diseases like scabies. These are all very much endemic in a disaster like this, and we need to do everything we can, working with the government, to make sure there isn't a second wave of deaths, which actually could be much greater than the first.
Can you describe more what you saw on your trip with Ban Ki-moon, with the Secretary General, who said this is the worst disaster he has ever seen?
Well, I say what was striking was we flew in a helicopter for around 100 miles altogether down the Indus River and some of the other river systems in Punjab. And wherever we flew, wherever we looked, as far as the eye could see, there was water and flooding. Villages cut off, crops flooded, roads destroyed, bridges destroyed, breaches in the dams, railways cut off, railway engines sitting in halfway covered with water, power stations not functioning. It was the sheer size of what we saw. And, of course, what we were looking at was the most fertile area of the country, which the country depends on for its food supplies and, of course, partly for its economic success. And these crops, for the greatest extent, I guess, are already lost. And that points to another huge problem we face, not right now, but very soon, which is how to help the farmers restore their livelihoods. They need to get, as soon as they can get back onto back to their homes and back onto their fields, they need help in terms of seeds and fertilizers and tools and rehabilitation of the irrigation systems to start planting, because the planting season will be with us very soon. Otherwise, we'll face another food security crisis of a very serious kind in a few months' time, because there'll be no crops.
John Holmes, we just played a clip in the lead into this of a man named Mohammed Lake. He was protesting because he's saying there seems to be no government here since the floods. We lost our children, our livestock. We could hardly save ourselves. Though we've come here, but we're getting nothing. Where's the government? What do we do? Where do we go? We have to tell the government, and it's the responsibility of the government to do whatever possible. What is the role of the government here?
Well, of course, the government is the primary responder. They are primarily responsible for looking after the welfare of their people. And we're there to help. And I say UN agencies and NGOs and others are doing their best to scale up our presence, get the resources, get more staff in, get the supplies there. But the reality is also, as I was trying to suggest at the beginning, that we're all overwhelmed, government included, by the sheer size of this disaster, stretching the length of the country and covering more than 1/10 of the population. It simply isn't possible with the best will in the world, and even with the best organized government in the world, to reach all those people in a few days. That's the nature of the challenge we face. If you remember the Haiti earthquake, which was a huge disaster at the beginning of this year, but that only affected 3 million people. Even there, it took us a long time to reach everybody with the food and clean water and shelter they needed. So that's some measure of the challenge we face here.
John Holmes, the world, the U.S. mainly, has spent more than $1 trillion on war. What do you need countries to do right now for Pakistan?
Well, what we need in the immediate future is for countries to contribute to the appeal we've made for $460 million, or send bilateral aid, or make sure that the agencies and the NGOs have the help they need. That's for the next few weeks. Then there'll be the major problem of early recovery for farmers in particular, as I suggested, and the beginnings of the recovery of some of the infrastructure, the roads and the bridges, which need to be repaired, at least temporarily, to enable movement to restart. And then for the longer term, there is a huge problem of how to rebuild the infrastructure that's been destroyed. There's, again, the bridges, the roads, the power stations, the communications links of all kinds. That's a program which may take years and will cost billions of dollars, and it's very important that the international community not only responds right now, but it also responds in a sustainable way and helps the government deal with those longer-term problems, because otherwise the economic prospects of Pakistan are going to be very badly affected, and of course that will have a wider effect on the stability of Pakistan and the region.
This issue of war, though, whether we're talking Haiti, where so many of the countries have not fulfilled their promises to Haiti after the earthquake, and Pakistan, the U.S. continuing to the drone attacks in northwest Pakistan, for example, in the midst of this, the worst crisis Pakistan has faced, natural disaster in its history. What do you say about that?
Well, I think the immediate focus has to be on humanitarian relief for the flood victims. Now, unfortunately, it's also true that the insurgency, whatever you want to call it, from the Taliban is not going to go away just because of these floods. There's been a temporary lull because everybody's been affected by the floods, including the terrorists, no doubt. But that's not going to go away. But the immediate focus has to be on this humanitarian relief. There's always been an argument about the balance between what you spend on military spending and military operations and what you spend on education and other things. We need to make sure we're spending the right amounts of money on the civilian infrastructure, the civilian help, the civilian basic services like education and health, because that's the key to long